Order, discipline, and the rule of law. It's what conservatives used to be all about. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, there is as James Toronto would call it, a kerfuffle at the White House, between the White House and the Pentagon, and the now former Secretary of the Navy, the top-ranking civilian officer in the military, because the Secretary of the Navy has been asked to step down. He's written a letter accepting that termination decision as if he had any choice in the matter. Bill, I don't want to get into the tit for tat and back and forth about what this is all about, because frankly, right now it's tough to figure out, because Defense Secretary Mark Esper said that he essentially fired Secretary of the Navy Richard Spencer. Spencer basically said that he couldn't follow President Trump's order regarding a Navy SEAL, Eddie Gallagher, and I'll get into a little detail about him later. But in any case, right now, as we record this, it's pretty confusing as to who did what to whom. I think it opens up, though, a broader question. When President Trump was just Donald Trump and was running for the presidency, he took a lot of guff for how he talked about our troops overseas who were in trouble for doing things that our military traditionally does not do. In this case, Bill, as you probably know, Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher was charged with a couple of different crimes, but only convicted of taking an inappropriate picture with an enemy corpse, a 17-year-old ISIS fighter. It was supposed to be a Navy review board, and it was possible that he was going to lose his SEAL-Trident. Anyway, the back and forth on this will shake out over the next couple of days. But Bill, it comes down to the heart of order and discipline and the rule of law. And President Trump seems to have stepped into that order and discipline process and injected himself as commander-in-chief to basically say, it's not a big deal what this kid did, and he should get to keep his trident. How do you feel about just the process of all this?
This is a very interesting question. I think certainly in terms of guys who are at the sharp end of the spear, posing for a picture with enemy dead is, well, it's inappropriate and it's all of those things. But at the same time, it's not the same as just massacring a village or just doing some other, kind of an atrocity like that. It's very difficult, and I have always tended to come down on the side of the people who are on the scene, that given the stress of the situation, given the level of combat and all of the other stuff, the split-second decisions, life and death split-second decisions, I am always going to extend the benefit of the doubt to the actual soldier, sailor, marine, or airman on the scene. Same thing goes for the police officers. With that said, one of the reasons that the United States military does not commit these atrocities, in fact, the only atrocity I can think of in the 20th century, well, certainly in the second half of the 20th century, was the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, which basically proved the point by its existence. It was so out of the ordinary and so repulsive and so repugnant that it rightfully brought a great deal of disgrace to the U.S. Armed Forces. So one of the reasons that these kind of things don't happen is because of discipline, and discipline does extend to things like photographs and so on. If you have guys who are out there and they start taking pictures, and then you start wondering, are they going to get to the point where they're collecting ears, or that kind of thing? I personally don't think it's a threat, and I have met several of these SEALs and have come away with, of all the things that I come away with from them, it is their discipline that impresses me the most.
Well, and that's the point in this whole incident, according to Richard Spencer anyway, and I'm sort of extrapolating from what he said in his letter accepting his termination at the hands of Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. But essentially what he's saying is that discipline is crucial to a military that is the envy of the world, because somehow, for the most part, we tend to conduct ourselves in a way that brings honor to the uniform. And for the sake of the good guys, of the people who do it right, of the people who don't take pictures with corpses, for the sake of them, this guy ought to get, and he's not prejudging it, but this guy, Eddie Gallagher, should get his review board, and the consequences of that should befall him.
My understanding is that this whole thing comes down to the Trident, that the entire issue comes down to whether or not he would be able to continue to wear the Trident after he had left active duty service.
And that's the heart of the matter.
It is, isn't it? This behavior, I don't know whether he retired or whether he was forced out, but this behavior has cost him his position. And then I think the question that I would have to ask myself on a moral basis is, if I were to take a look at the balance of this man's service to the United States of America and the things he's endured in the service of this country, and I would look at his actual career in terms of whether or not there were any other kinds of excesses on his part. But speaking from a personal point of view, I think that the disciplinary action was appropriate, but given a lifetime of service, I personally think he should be allowed to retain the Trident, which I think he's earned.
Well, so you can personally believe that, Bill, and maybe that's a legitimate way to look at it, given mitigating circumstances. But the question at the heart of this right now is whether President Trump making a public statement, not an order actually, but making a public statement that this guy should keep his Trident is an appropriate way for the commander-in-chief to intervene in the process of military justice.
Well, he is the commander-in-chief. It is certainly his prerogative to do so, as it's also the president's prerogative to have a Secretary of the Navy who sees eye to eye with the president and so on. I don't know, Scott. This one is one of those things where it just seems like that escalated quickly. Both cases are both the case of the SEAL and the case of the Secretary of the Navy. Both these cases are about honor, about personal honor, and that is a very sacred thing to people in the armed services. And it seems to me that Donald Trump has taken a side on the issue. He's come down on the side of the guy who was out in the field, the person who was responsible for maintaining discipline throughout the Navy, found that unacceptable and decided to resign over it. I think that's his choice, or to the degree that, his opposition to it caused him to have the letter of his resignation.
And let me just get into a little bit of how that back and forth goes, because the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, is saying that the reason why Spencer got fired was not because of his particular views on whether Gallagher ought to get to keep his Trident or how that review board process should work, but the fact that Spencer allegedly went to the president behind Esper's back, behind the back of the Secretary of Defense, and offered a deal to President Trump that basically said, We'll let Gallagher keep his Trident if you let this review board process go forward like it's supposed to, in the interest of good order and discipline. Ironically, Esper's accusation is Spencer did not observe good order and discipline in his effort to make sure good order and discipline was invoked and sustained.
Wow. It's unusual to find a case or situation or a topic that is as delicately balanced as this one is. Both of those statements are absolutely correct. The offer on the part of the Secretary of the Navy was, I think, precisely the correct offer. I think it was the kind of compromise that I would expect to see here. In other words, we're not going to simply ignore this, but at the same time, we're going to go through the procedures we need to maintain discipline, but at the same time, we agree to let the individual keep his Trident for the service he's performed for this country. That seems reasonable to me. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. He went out of the chain of command in order to do so. And so now he is guilty of the same breach of discipline that the Navy SEAL was accused of. Obviously not the same incident, but it's the same issue.
Well, yeah, and that's the other side of that irony, because as you said, well, let's weigh Gallagher's entire career in light of this isolated incident. Well, here we have the Navy Secretary's entire career, including his own military service, in light of this one incident, apparently, where he went behind the Secretary of Defense's back. And oddly enough, he's going out in disgrace, in a sense, while people are fighting to make sure that Gallagher doesn't.
I don't know that he's going out in disgrace. I certainly don't consider him to be going out in disgrace. Anybody who says, I cannot faithfully execute this order because I consider it immoral or illegal, whether I think that person is right or not, I think that person is entitled to the respect that kind of decision demands. A person who says, I cannot ethically carry out this order, Mr. President, therefore, if you insist on this order, then I'm going to resign my position. I don't consider that to be a person who's cashiered in disgrace at all. But what's interesting about this, I think, is this, and to the degree, this whole thing's just a mess. You've got, they're both very good men, obviously. They both served their country with distinction and honor for long periods of time. Both of them made mistakes. And to the degree that the discipline of the armed forces is being maintained, I think the thing that we should keep directly in front of us on this issue is that they're both out of a job for these breaches of discipline. At the same time, both of these breaches are I would consider to be really quite minor, but I do agree with the principle that it doesn't matter whether it's minor or not. They're breaches of discipline. They have to be punished, because if you don't punish the little stuff, it's like the broken windows policy in New York. If you don't punish the little stuff, then pretty soon you're not going to be able to control the big stuff. So on some level, there seems to me to be a kind of a symmetry about this. I think the whole thing is a real shame, for the people involved. But both the SEAL and the Navy Secretary committed acts that were, breaches of discipline. Both of them are out of a job. Both of them could either be considered resigning in disgrace or with honor, depending on your point of view and depending on how you weigh these kind of things, how you weigh I don't want to call being photographed with a corpse an atrocity. I think that word needs to be reserved for atrocities. It's certainly unseemly and unbecoming and all of that stuff.
Bill, there's an interesting perspective of President Trump that a lot of people wanted a guy like him to come to Washington, D.C. because he would upset the apple cart. It would not be business as usual. He would, buck the traditional two-party system maybe and do things that neither party was expecting. He's a business person who would act with, what Alexander Hamilton would call dispatch in the office of the presidency. And I think that there are a lot of people who that's what they wanted him to do to the bureaucracy in general. I'm wondering if those same people really wanted President Trump to come in and upset the apple cart of the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Did he actually, I'm not familiar with the details, did he actually...
He tweeted, as usual.
Did he actually order the Navy Secretary to not have this commission go forward?
My understanding is he tweeted, as usual.
Well, that's not an order.
Of course not.
So,
and that's what I'm asking, is like, if you're coming in being the kind of guy that President Trump is, right, does this call for an additional measure of circumspection and probity when it comes to dealing with the military because of the need for order and discipline if we're to conduct these very dangerous missions around the world?
So now we've got ourselves basically a three-way tragedy here, or at least a three-way, goat rodeo. You have a president who was elected because he speaks his mind and has certainly not been shy about speaking his mind. If he were to order the Secretary of the Navy to basically cancel this review process because he'd taken the side of the SEAL, the Navy SEAL, I think he would probably be legally and within his bounds as Commander-in-Chief. But certainly, I don't think that's the kind of precedent that I would like to see set. And so now it looks to me as if we have three people. Donald Trump did not order the Secretary of the Navy to put aside this investigation. the Secretary of the Navy said he could not obey an order that he considered to be immoral and unethical, so he resigned. And then you've got this guy on the pointy end of the spear who's really started this entire chain of events. And it seems to me that it would be entirely possible to look at all three of these cases, Trump's secretaries and the SEALs cases, Gallagher and Richardson. Did I get that right?
Richard Spencer is the Secretary of the Navy, and Eddie Gallagher is the Navy SEAL.
Spencer and Gallagher. So you've got Trump, Spencer, and Gallagher. Each one of them is making. Each one of them is in the moral, is in the balance in terms of morality, legality, and so on. And I think a person who could make a compelling argument, a good lawyer, let's say, could find a way to dice this one 9 ways. I think you could find a way to find all three of them morally justified. I think you could find a way to find all three of them morally reprehensible. I think you could find a way to defend one and condemn the other two, vice versa, and so on, through all the permutations. Each one of these cases are very curiously balanced. I don't want our special forces guys becoming the kind of people that take trophies. At the same time, I'm not out there with those special forces guys. I'm not entirely aware that I don't know anything about the circumstances of the picture, don't know anything about the circumstances of anything. I wasn't there. I know that they're getting shot at. So I'm inclined to want to give those guys the benefit of the doubt.
Well, and what you just said,
hold on. You got a Navy secretary now who believes in order and discipline, and he is determined that by having the president not go through with this procedure, that's a violation of the discipline that he's sworn to uphold. But at the same time, not only did he violate discipline by going around the back of the defense secretary, the president never actually ordered him to do this, if I understand him correctly. He merely tweeted as an opinion, and that to me is not an order. That's not the same as saying you are going to get off of this case. And finally, President Trump is coming down on the side of the warfighter, which he promised to do. And I remember the case of one of our guys who was cashiered for. I don't remember if he beat up or shot a guy who was abusing boys, was raping boys in his presence, kind of thing. But I think the American people tend to side with our guys on the ground on this one. This one's a very, very interesting and delicately balanced problem. And again, my only takeaway from this is that I think it's a tragedy that I just wish hadn't happened.
Well, you just did something that flies in the face of the coverage that I read, in that you carefully analyzed both sides of it and gave credibility and weight to each position and thought it through. The coverage I read basically said that the reaction to this on Capitol Hill, for example, is falling out neatly along political lines as usual. And the people who don't like how Trump behaves, of course, see nothing good in the way he behaved. And the people who do like the way Trump behaves saw nothing possibly bad in the way he behaved, and it's just like everything else in Washington, D.C.
You know, one of the great milestones in achieving some minuscule shred of wisdom in this life is the realization that no matter how much we may want it to be true, virtually every decision we make in our lives does not come down to a good choice and a bad choice. It comes down to a bad choice and a worse choice. And the inability for there to be a clear-cut moral pathway through this is an indication of that fundamental fact of life. There's no good choice here. I think all three parties balanced their ethical and moral decisions on their own scales, and the outcome, while certainly regrettable in terms of their service to the nation and to the damage or support, whatever it might have caused the president, it just makes me wish very much that photo hadn't been taken. And I'm sure all three parties feel the same way.
The members of BillWhittle.com are paying for conversations like this because they too think deeply about the news of the day in the context of time-tested principles. And so they actually enjoy seeing us wrestle with these kinds of questions. They don't settle for pat answers. They're not looking for talking points. And we are grateful for a people who is willing to challenge and be challenged, to conduct civil dialogue with a sense of rational thought and anchored in values that endure. If you are that kind of person, perhaps you should be one of us. Perhaps you should go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. And by the way, if you don't have time to watch all of these episodes, I mean, there are a lot of people watching them on YouTube and at BillWhittle.com. On YouTube, they click that little notification bell, that Liberty Bell as we call it, to get those notifications. And you can get notifications by clicking the little bell at BillWhittle.com as well. But if you don't have time to see all the videos, you can now hear all these conversations with your favorite podcast player or app. Just go to BillWhittle.com and click that podcast link.
Surely most people are tuning in for the visuals.
Most people are, and stop calling me Shirley. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you watching. And for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thank you.